But it got to the point where I'm like, literally, I have one question for you. We'll start with one thing, which is, what is your single most compelling biological mechanism for why red meat is bad for longevity? She's had a high exposure burden. She has no plaque that can be measured. Her LDL is through the roof. You treat her? Now, the answer is no. Well, the answer is no objectively. The answer is she, as an MD PhD, decided not to do statins.
Well, we got to talk about fiber. So,
all right.
Fiber, necessary, true or false?
It's not necessary.
It's not necessary.
No, nobody's going to argue it's necessary. I mean, people
what are you talking about? A lot of people argue it's necessary.
Well, then they're not using the word necessary correctly. Speaking about documentaries, this is going to be a tangent, but hopefully it's a tangent you're okay on going on. I was listening to some of Bryan Johnson's podcasts. I know you have had some interactions with them on social media recently, including around meat. I listened to his podcast on Diary of a CEO and More Plates, More Dates with Derek. And the reason it's coming to mind is because he was commenting on Chris Gardner's Twin documentary on Netflix, which I'll be honest, and I'm going to go back to the point I actually wanted to make. I kind of classified into this propaganda category. And even people like our friend Chris McCaskill kind of had to admit I had some points. Like, it was supposed to cover this twin study they did at Stanford, but it was a 4-episode documentary in which 3 of the episodes don't discuss any of the data. And only in the last episode that they tease a little bit of it. But the entire thing is just around the benefits of veganism, highlighting foods that they don't even eat in the study. So in one of the episodes, it's like, here are these students that are making vegan eggs. And I'm like, isn't this supposed to be about the twin experiment? Everything opens with, and there's this Stanford twin experiment. They didn't need any vegan eggs in the twin experiment. So it's a bait and switch. I think most nutrition documentaries are like that. This one is so true to what it promises up front, and it delivers on that, and actually tries to open up a conversation rather than just waving a flag. But if you don't mind the tangent, I'd actually just like to take a moment to talk about Bryan Johnson and get your thoughts on him.
I want your thoughts on him, because this has been to kind of set this up for people. Quite literally, I think both you and I were engaging him in some of what's going on with him, and I want to say just the last couple months. He's been off my radar this whole time until recently.
So the reason I was reviewing the podcast is because a pretty prominent YouTuber. I think I can just say this. I'll let you know if Joseph wants me to cut it out. But Joseph Everett, from what I learned, who's had a back and forth with him, is planning on doing a video. I looked at some of Joseph's stuff on Bryan, and I think it's pretty well done. It's pretty direct, but it's well done with legitimate questions and criticisms of some of the data he's put out there or not put out there. So Joseph asked if I would, be interviewed for the video. I said yes, but I want to do my due diligence. So I started to go back and listen to Bryan's stuff. And I remember I first listened to Bryan in long form on Trevor Noah's podcast, and I was so taken by how thoughtful he was in long form. So how well he made some of the arguments, and it really gave me a different perspective on him. I'd say at a high level, I actually really respect what he's doing. How he challenges social norms, how he's doing this N=1 experiment, which I think is quite legitimate, even if he's commercializing it. And just his innovative spirit, and the way he thinks about changing norms and challenging what is society 50, 100 years from now going to think about us today. And when you listen to him in long form, and the podcasts I listened to were Derek, More Plates, More Dates, the Trevor Noah podcast, and Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett and Bryan. He's great. I really think he's thought a lot about this at a philosophical level. But his engagement, or what I've seen on the short form media, has been, let's say, I think, less intellectually rigorous. And I don't put that out there as, to some degree it's a criticism, but I think to a larger extent it's a question. Because I could say the same, I could turn the camera on me and say the same thing as myself. I hate doing Instagram Reels. I truly hate chopping up my long form content, putting out an Instagram Reel, and then having some person say oh, but what about X, Y, Z? I'm like, that is addressed in the long video. Please go watch it. So I realize short form is a necessary evil, and that you use it in order to kind of test people's emotions and what provokes them. And so, making the devil's advocate argument for Brian, maybe that's what he's doing. And he's putting things out there that might be more superficial, but hoping to excite a more a deep dialogue, also accepting that there's going to be some collateral damage. He's going to piss some people off, but not minding that too much because the fact of the matter is that is a consequence of the space. I'm going to pause here. I have further thoughts, but
Yeah.
response?
Yeah. So I want to say that there's an extraordinary claim he makes that I think is, I guess my best word is going to be problematic. That's not quite the word I want to use, but he's claiming to be the healthiest person on the planet. Obviously, there's a kind of a marketing component to this, right? It's regularly said, I think it's 2 million a year. 2 million a year is spent to analyze all this science and give him exactly the right food and nutrients and so forth to, he's the ultimate in one in the sense of longevity. If there was a really rich person who just wanted to spend a lot of money to make that happen, right? It's a very fascinating story.
Right.
It's a strong claim to say you're the healthiest. And the very first instinct that I have when somebody says that is, dang it, you're going to feel very compelled to have to keep backing that up. So, for example, after I'd followed him and after I'd heard that he was saying that, and I'd followed him before I'd heard that was part of his claim. I kept thinking, does he share when he gets a cold or if he gets like stomach flu, food poisoning, if he has any kind of, or is there just no mention of these things occurring as though they just don't occur? Because it's kinda like, a lot of these other influencers in the space for which they're using their own body and their own experience as an advertisement for what they're promoting and what they're putting forth. That always concerns me a little bit. I'm not saying it's a bad thing inherently. I'm just saying I have a natural sense of skepticism when it comes to that.
Yeah, I was digging into that a little bit because he seems to be transparent about some of his like lab work, for example, which I applaud. But there are also layers that just seem a little bit fishy to me. Like, and I don't know if this has been resolved, but there was discussion about whether or not he's still on like testosterone because he didn't release his LH and FSH. Um,
Did he
so he
did
both
he get it tested?
I will presume so. So that and so I don't know why he wouldn't disclose that. There was also a point in time where it's like he didn't have an ApoB and it was like didn't get good enough measure. I don't know what that means. And also, and this is actually more to the point, I wanted to do some digging, and this was literally like yesterday when Joseph was messaging me because Brian had put out an Excel sheet where he makes these claims like I'm in the top percentile for X, Y, and Z, you know, and sometimes there's references. So I wanted to go click on the reference. I'm like, well, what do you mean you're in the top percentile for blood glucose? Fasting blood glucose, which is like 73. Or there was another one like omega-3 index. He's like, and it gave his number was 9.98%. And he's like, I'm in the top, I forget what it was, 1%. I'm like, well, I know general ranges for a lot of these like, quantification metrics. 8 to 12 is generally like considered good. Mine, I know, is 17.2. So if you're in the top 1% at 9.98 and I'm at 17.2, am I in the top 0.0000001%? Like, what are you referring to? What is the reference range? Also, things like telomere length. Like, I want to see the data you're making this claim off of. Also, you've been doing this for a couple of years. You're in your 40s. You really expect me to believe that you've increased your telomerase activity so much so that you're now in the top, I don't remember the exact numbers, but top, let's say 1%, I think it was 1% of telomere length. And then there's other things like intracellular NAD. I'm like, well, yeah, if you're supplementing high dose NMN, your levels are going to go up. But it's like, if there was a decay in zinc levels from age 18 to 90, and a 9-year-old heavily supplements zinc and then says, I have the zinc levels of you know, an 18-year-old, it's like, okay, what do you do? So I don't know how much to make out of the lab. Like, he's clearly a healthy person. Overall, you look at labs, if you take him at face value, I'm like, all right, cool. But yeah, you're right. The claim about healthiest person alive, and then some of the specifics about the claims he makes, the percentiles he's in, I think it could be done more rigorously. And then this is where I think if I had advice for Bryan, if I may be so bold as to offer advice to Bryan, after singing his praises, because I genuinely think with respect to the philosophy, he's very thoughtful. Like, I really enjoy his long form discussions. They get me to think. I actually do think, and I'll just go so far as to say this, of the longevity quote gurus in the space, he is my favorite overall.
Mm.
I actually think I like the guy. But I think he loses credibility, like we were talking about earlier, when he makes certain claims and it's very apparent he doesn't know what he's talking about. So, like in the Diary with CEO podcast, he referenced some study on like olive oil consumption, where he's like olive oil consumption, and in fact, I think he accidentally said that it was like in addition to the normal diet, caused like over 5 pounds of weight loss. In retrospect, and Derek did actually a pretty good job of respectfully pushing back on this. Like, it was very clear Bryan did not know the study he was talking about, nor really have spent time thinking about the mechanisms underlying. And that's become a little bit of a pattern where sometimes he makes claims or refers to studies where I don't think he understands the science. I think he's a great philosopher. He's not a scientist. And he's actually the first person to admit this. Where in the Derek episode, he's like, look, I rely on my team. I'm not the best person to be communicating the science, but we have a very rigorous team put together. The issue is, speaking now as a scientist, you're not disclosing how you're coming up with these protocols, which I realize now are like private IP. Although it kind of conflicts with your message that this was never for commercial purposes, and now it clearly is, which is fine. I have nothing against building a business, but if you want me to take you seriously as a scientist, like I need to understand the rationale that's going into your protocols, and what he puts out publicly is not rigorous. And then he says his team's doing it, but his team's not communicating. And I'll just say, I've actually gotten to see some of the back end material they were going to put out. I'm not going to name what it was on. I'm pretty sure it was okay to have shared this with me. Otherwise, I would have been under NDA and not shared this with me. But I reviewed a document that was going to go out via his team because we have, let's say, overlapping partners in a couple of respects. And I shredded it to pieces. It was so lacking in rigor. And actually, they never ended up publishing on the topic after that.
Mm.
I don't know what happened. I won't speculate, and hopefully I don't get anybody in trouble saying that. If Bryan wants to have a further conversation, my suggestion to him is to up your scientific rigor and optics around that scientific rigor. Maybe his team maybe everything is pristine watertight behind the scenes. But right now, the way the optics are on display with some of the things that I've just communicated, I think that is his Achilles heel. Because when you go on Diary of a CEO and reveal you don't know the study you're talking about, and then hand wave about your team being the one that really knows the science, but we can't access your team's work, you understand why people will be skeptical.
Yeah, but this is a common place where you and I have kind of a disagreement. I think that there's this higher layer of scientific rigor where somebody like yourself would be like, "Hey, I'm a critic for you lacking the scientific rigor, you influencer person that I can identify here, but you're a fraction of the total." A lot of people who are not at those levels are going, "Sounds cool."
Yeah.
I love the narrative that it's 2 million a year and that, you've got a team behind you. And by the way, I wanna echo your sentiment. I hope it doesn't come off as though I'm just strictly critical of him. First of all, I think it's a fascinating thing to see happen in real time, that there really is somebody who has all of this investment and has taken this on in a way that only somebody rich in these kinds of resources can make this happen. And the level of support that he has with his family, I think, is kind of cool because they're all in on this process and trying to make this work. Now, I do want to bring up one other thing, which is where the first time we had an interaction, I'm not expecting him to have an interaction with me, but he had made this thread on red meat and was and to be fair to him, the way that he had the thread start out, it was, "I don't consume red meat. I'm cool with it if you do," or something to that effect, right? So it didn't come off as ideologically hit you over the head, right? It was more he wanted to make a thread or his team made a thread, something like that, but it was his Twitter account that went into trying to explain why he feels that eating red meat would lower his longevity and therefore goes against the larger goal that he's going for. Went through those studies, and indeed, it gets us right back to epidemiology. And I brought up, because I have to do it. Healthy user bias is a pain in the butt, but it has to be brought up. Not because we can just use it as a way to just toss out all data, but until we have health conscious folks who are proactively consuming red meat, which is a recent phenomenon, we do not know how much those people who eat red meat have those aspects of healthy user bias, such as being more likely to smoke, being more likely to be sedentary, and all of the other things that come with ignoring the predominant advice of the era, which is what we're in right now, which is skip the steak and have a salad.
Right.
The concept of carnivore that healthy people would be taking on, the concept of keto that healthy people intentionally would be taking on, that's new. That's brand new. Athletes before this point, certainly the athletes I was growing up with, they would consider saturated fat, they would consider meat, bad. You want to have a plant predominant diet and try to keep the meat, especially red meat, to a minimum. So we don't know from strict observational data how much that healthy user bias affects things. And so that's where the conversation started with him and I. And sure enough, he did concede. To his credit, he did concede that it is difficult to disentangle that, but that he feels he knows enough to make that position, to have that position at this point in time.
Right. A couple things I want to say on that. One is I just want to dissect the motivation behind why he made that post out of the blue.
Exactly. That's part of why I kind of
It's engagement bait, right? Because hitting on carnivore and downing red meat plays well. It does. So I don't even like criticize that decision. I just want to like reveal. I'm pretty sure that's why he decided to put that post out, which got a lot of attention, and he knew it would. He's not dumb. Um, and I think it's fine to like hedge his bets if he's more comfortable with a plant-based diet. Again, the proof's in the pudding. If he's doing well and leg pressing 800 something pounds, it's good for him. But again, like, yeah, level of intellectual rigor. I actually tried to engage with that conversation, and I kept on paring back my response. You know I'm long-winded, but it got to the point where I'm like, literally, I have one question for you. We'll start with one thing, which is, what is your single most compelling biological mechanism for why red meat is bad for longevity? And as a longevity expert, he should be able to answer that.
and that was part of his counter to me, by the way, was he was saying, well, we don't just have this epidemiological data. This is also backed up by mechanistic data. Like, okay, so what's the best one? Give me the best paper, the best experiment, the thing that nails it, right?
Not even, it doesn't even need to be beyond a shadow of a doubt. It just needs to be, what is a good biological rationale? And let's just start like a decent one where you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm going to hedge my bets and bet on plant-based proteins and a plant-based diet. Like just give that one mechanism. Because I have yet to find one that's compelling. It's not IGF-1. It's not TMAO. Like, I don't think it's saturated fat. What is it? And we can start the discussion there. That's fine. I'm open to actually plant-based diets being better for longevity. I'm open to that concept, but you need to make the case. And I'm definitely not like claiming that animal-rich diets or carnivore diets are best for longevity. I'm not making that claim. I'm just asking you to support your claim.
Right.
Because, you need to like couple the nutritional epidemiology with at least biological plausibility. Now, to his credit or to his defense, he's a huge social media presence. So it's understandable that you don't get to every comment. But when you've already engaged with someone, and also again, I'm not nobody. I'm a PhD, soon to be an MD PhD, pretty well branded with 100,000 followers. Like if I ask a question, might be a comment you could address if it's a legitimate question to what you're commenting on, asking what is one decent biological mechanism by which you think red meat intake will be bad for longevity is a good one. Maybe he didn't see it. If he hears us now, I hope he does respond to that.
It's getting back to the you not being a nobody. You'll just have to outgrow them, which you will.
Well, no,
And
no, it's
at
not
a
that.
certain point, you're more likely to get a response. This is just the currency of social media, right? The larger your following gets, the more they'll want to engage you because that it helps their engagement base.
Right. So I'm actually going to do a little bit of a flex right now, and with a purpose, which is like when he talks about intellectual rigor and his team doing, staying up to date on the science. Like me, Is my finger not on the pulse of the science pretty well? Like, even with respect to the aging stuff, I did a video, that involved Bryan Johnson in like a cameo style, not like he showed up on my channel by will, like took clips, but about extracellular vesicles and holding microRNA and that affecting longevity. I had something coming out soon on He Loves Olive Oil. Well, there's this amazing polyphenol oleuropein that was just published on, and they did a hypothesis naive screen of, I think it was 5,571 metabolites, and looked at things that could change calcium metabolism muscles, which declines with age. In fact, there was just another paper that was published in Cell Reports Medicine finding similar, where they took 139 people between ages of 20 and 93 and looked at muscle metabolism across the lifespan. And what you find, just focusing on muscle as a case in point, is that calcium influx into mitochondria declines. And this is really important because the calcium influx actually couples muscle contraction to energy production. So it activates pyruvate dehydrogenase, kind of like revs up the Krebs cycle. And you have decreased calcium import into mitochondria because of something called mitochondrial calcium uniporter. But they find that this oleuropein, which is in olive leaves, and to some degree in olive oil, can increase this. And actually, in a preclinical model, was shown to increase endurance, performance, and muscle mass in mice. Now, that's a whole lot of jargon and me rambling. But the reason I did that is because if he wants a team with actual mastery, that's the kind of thing I expect from a good team to have on the tip of their fingers. I do not claim to be an expert in longevity science. I'm just a dude reading a paper without notes, rifling that back to you based on my reading of the literature. So, my question to Bryan is your expert team even at that level? You're looking at me right now, Dave. Do I have any notes? Or is that just like off the top of my head for something I read a few days ago?
Oh, and this is I think to expand on your point, it's your job, or at least it's becoming your job to be at the cutting edge of a wide spectrum
Right.
of different things, right? But if it was your job to work for Bryan, to be the longevity expert on his team, of course, your purview would be almost entirely filled on longevity studies and being at the top of your game for that.
Right. And so I actually know the oleuropein content of Blueprint olive oil because I got those specs. So like, you just think okay, now I'm talking directly to Bryan. Think from a marketing angle about what I just said and how easy it would be to have a really deep post or video about the science of olive leaf extract in muscle health, featuring your olive oil, and top new science about how oleuropein increases mitochondrial calcium unipolar activity, gets calcium into mitochondria, and that in preclinical models, this literally increases muscle mass. Like, you could see how sexy and enticing and legitimate that mechanistic argument would be. I would think that if your team is actually putting together things with that level of rigor, you'd be putting it out there, and I don't see it, which makes me skeptical. And by
But
the way, if you want a consultant, you know how to find me.
yes. But hey, dissing on red meat, that that gets a lot of traction.
It does. Just to like wrap this up, look, I'm being tongue in cheek with Bryan, which I hope he appreciates. One thing I did respect in his long form media is he really echoes a lot of the things that I've said, including at my lecture yesterday at COSI, which is I'm not pretending to be perfect at social media communication. This is an art and it's hard and it's something we're evolving in. But if you really want to evolve as a communicator, you need to be able to take feedback where it's given authentically. And so I hope he takes this as kind of pokey, tongue in cheek, but as a sign of genuine constructive criticism and an open invitation to have a dialogue about all things longevity, do not die, social media communication, and olive oil if he wants. I'm also up to having a push-up competition with him. Just like what? He might have me on leg press though, although I'm a pretty small guy. I don't know.
Lean mass hyperresponders and risk. Let's say you have no other information. I give you a big, huge, I don't know, 1,000 lean mass hyperresponders in a data set. Where do they rank on risk for cardiovascular disease? Let's give it a 5 scale in their quintiles, right? Are they a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5? What do you think? You have no other information but their lipid profile.
1.25 stars.
1.25. Okay.
Is 0 stars an option?
No. Has to be basically they're the quintiles. So you're saying it's in the second quintile.
I mean, I'm hedging here a little bit. I mean, also, I'm trying to answer in a way that doesn't require me to reveal data that I know that people might not, that I might be allowed to talk about. So that will influence my decision. I'm being naive to data I actually have in my brain.
Okay, but even data you may have in your brain, even the things that you and I both know that other people may not know, there's still the long-term data, right? And so a common criticism of the study that I think it's worth hearing out all criticisms. It's kind of the larger theme of our conversation, right? Is that there's a degree with which we were in the lean mass hyperresponder study at Lundquist, we were excluding those who had any prior risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Of course, I think that makes total sense, and it's why we were able to do a match.
Factors.
Yeah, classical risk.
That's the whole point. If you isolate, the question is, if you isolate LDL as a variable in people who don't have FH,
Yep.
or like, let's say, genetically acquired FH, which
Right.
I think is the better definition of FH.
But you don't have any of the metabolic syndrome
Right.
criteria, for example. You don't have a prior diagnosis of atherosclerosis. You don't have a prior diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, things along those lines, right? But I often like to put it this way. I like to say, so by this eligibility criteria, if a patient walked in and they fit this eligibility criteria, would you tell them they need to take steps to lower their LDL cholesterol?
I would get functional imaging.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry that kind of like circumvents your question, but
That-
that's, I think, what you need to do. It's like, all right, based on the current literature, this is a risk variable, but in an individual with no other risk variables, we're kind of in an absence of evidence situation here. I know people are going to push back on that if they want to get into the nitty gritty of that. I feel very comfortable defending that statement. We are in an absence of evidence area for people with very high, I mean, to be clear, other than the studies we published, the one that is about to be published and the one that we published previously, for people with very high LDL with no other risk factors. So it's hard to make a determination, but what is clear is that even despite having higher LDL, and this is even in FH literature, if your CAC and probably CTA, because that's even better resolution and looks not just to calcified plaques, is 0, your risk profile is pretty low. And so you can use that to make a determination. I mean, people can intuit what they want from the fact that my LDL runs over 500 and I'm not medicated. My mother is about to turn 60 and her LDL is in the 400s and has been high her entire life, actually. I don't think she meets the criteria for FH. She would, like, I think throughout most of her life ran like the 160s to 190 range. But, probably since she turned 30, 35, it probably has been LDL above 200.
Has she been keto? Is that
So, and then she got keto, and then she manifested lean mass hyperresponder on top of that. So
Right.
imagine, like, average lifetime baseline of,
probably in the 7,000?
no, so like 180 average lifetime baseline before she went keto.
Right. That's what I'm saying. She's probably 7,000 cumulative or more.
Oh,
Something at least, right?
Definitely.
And so with that,
Oh, much more, because she's about to turn 60,
Yeah,
and 100 times 60 is 6,000.
yeah,
So she's probably approaching 10,000 at least.
your mom does not look 60 at all. She looks so freaking young.
She has a moment in the film, my mom is about to turn 60. So yeah, I got the genes.
Crazy, yeah.
That aside, she has a CCTA. She just got it, class 0.
Yeah.
So what do you do with that? She's had a high exposure burden. She has no plaque that can be measured. Her LDL is through the roof. You treat her? Now, the answer is no. Well,
Yeah.
the answer is no objectively. The answer is she, as an MD PhD, decided not to do statins.
And so with the understandable caveat that we would throw into this or any other media where this is where I'm about to say what I'm about to say, I actually had a slide up, and I have had in a few of my different talks now where I would call this, I actually want to name this position. Maybe you can help me name it, but it's a lot of people are confluencing into this position where basically it's, hey, did you go on keto and then you saw this hyper response that your LDL went up? Okay. Next step, imaging. If you go into the imaging and you're low to 0 risk, then there currently is no data that supports taking action to lower your LDL. In fact, there's quite a lot of data suggesting that if you're already at 0, like a 0 CAC, you're you're unlikely to derive benefit from taking steps to lower your LDL. But I got to couple that with the same folks would say, okay, but if you do have existing cardiovascular disease or you have poor metabolic health, then those same folks would probably, depending on the degree in both of those, would probably advise taking steps to lower their LDL. Now, when I say this is me just kind of carrying the water for them.
Yeah.
I myself, I keep trying to emphasize, I don't want anyone to take any advice from me. I don't want them to try to derive any advice from me.
They're going through though. I mean, we're both gonna get the criticism, even though I'm in the same way. I'm like, look, in a few months, even when I have my MD, like, I'm not your doctor.
Yeah.
I'm not. Like, I'm here to share data. I'm not here to make a medical decision for you.
Right. Right.
So I think what we say is pretty clear and caveated.
But I can say this much. What I just outlined, the fact that there are a lot of folks going into that, um, having that position, that is an evidence-based position.
So that's the thing. It's very fair, and because people are gonna derive from it, but what you just said is totally accurate. If you have high LDL, no other risk factors, and a CAC of 0, where's the data showing that the treatment is good for long-term outcomes? Especially all-cause outcomes, considering other trade-offs. We had some beautiful presentations, including by like Brett Scher, who is a cardiologist. I think it was yesterday, or maybe a Saturday, going over that and going over the risk to reward ratio and being like, look, given the number needed to treat, given the data available, there probably is no benefit. And I would not prescribe in these cases. And I would prescribe in these other cases.
Yeah. But yet, Brett and Adrian, for example, who are both active,
Yeah.
themselves prescribe statins.
Yeah, I know. And
So it's not, so these are not folks who are actively anti-statin per se.
my dad's on a statin. And I think he had cardiovascular disease early, metabolic syndrome, obesity, and is using it for secondary prevention. It has pleiotropic effects, including anti-inflammatory effects.
And that's the other thing.
And he's actually a low L. He's the only person in my family with low LDL, ironically.
And that's the other thing is I was chatting about this with Nick is,
Nick V.
Yeah, Nick Verhoeven. Hope I'm saying that right.
Physionic.
Verhoeven, Physionic, is there may be pleiotropic impacts to statins that are of special benefit for specific populations, particularly those that may be secondary prevention and maybe in a particular window. Whatever. It's, again, me even mentioning that isn't me promoting a statin, nor am I saying that to suggest that I don't want you to take a statin. The bottom line is this. We haven't yet come to an agreement broadly, even though the data were already there, even before the lean mass hyperresponder data was coming up, that low to no cardiovascular disease in somebody who's metabolically healthy, they don't have any other cardiovascular risk factors, who have sky-high LDL, there just was not any population-level data that suggested that they would derive a benefit. And there should be nothing wrong with just saying that out loud because, as you often point out, there are trade-offs, right? There's trade-offs with any intervention.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was definitely a moment for me to come out of the closet with respect to my LDL publicly because, think about, the environment that I'm beset in. And now people, at the Harvard Medical School campus, they know who I am. I walk into my last 2 courses, one of the course directors, I'm a big fan of your YouTube channel. And my peers were like, oh yeah, I love that video you put out this morning on X, Y, and Z. So people know so much about me just because I'm out there think about the things we talk about in this podcast already. But with respect to the lipid levels, I will say there's still a subgroup who it's kind of like a scarlet letter S. It's you're walking around with these lipid levels and you're not under treatment. It's like
you have a death wish.
You have a death wish, or I don't know. It's just like an in-group, out-group thing. I think about Dr. Snooze and this Dr. Snooze and the star belly sneeches. The nerd is always changing. Is it cool to have a star on your belly or not? And right now, I think it's oh, cool to be lower is better with respect to your ApoB. At least in what it seems like in conventional social media health spaces. It's a flex. Be oh, look how low my ApoB is, and the panel of your health markers. I remember Simon has a comprehensive health scoring system, Simon Hill.
Mm-hmm.
I remember taking it, and I was just I lost 1 point on 10. It was something like that, and I'm yeah, guess which one I lost?
ApoB,
of course.
All right.
I mean, inevitably, but is that a point that is weighted similarly to the others. I don't remember what the others were, but like from my point of view, like let's say one, and I'm not saying it is. I don't remember what the others were, but like was waist to height ratio. I think my waist to height ratio is a much better marker of my metabolic health than my ApoB. My 2 cents.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of glad you brought up, especially being in school and chatting with your colleagues. One reason we should return to the timeline for just a moment is that it is standard, and a lot of people don't know this, it is standard that the point where you're getting your MD, next step is to go into residency. It is extraordinary for you to choose not to go into residency, and I think a lot of people don't know that. How frequent, or I should say non-frequently, does that happen?
I don't know the statistics. I'll say just like with respect to the culture, like now, you're a fourth year, you're doing like classes. The icebreaker at the beginning of every class is, where did you grow up? Where are you going to residency? Or what are you trying to match into? Like it's just a default. It's not like, what are you doing next year? It's like, what are you applying with respect to residency? So
Talk about the matching part, because I think a lot of people don't know that.
So you just you kind of decide the specialty you want to match into. So it could be like internal medicine or general surgery or pediatrics.
And you'll have some gist of this because a lot of people also don't know this. When you're training to be an MD, you actually get kind of a rotation into each of these
Yeah.
specialities to kind of get a taste.
Yes,
of
you
what
get an
you're like.
exposure, then you could do electives, and kind of like feel out what you want to do, and then you choose one to specialize into, and then often people subspecialize. So if I wanted to do like pediatric endocrinology, like David Ludwig, I do a pediatrics residency and then a fellowship in endocrinology. There's many more stages. My girlfriend, for example, she's in general surgery. So she went to Harvard Medical School, and afterwards she applied to general surgery. Little pat in the back for her, like literally everyone wanted her. So she got her pick, but then ended up choosing a hospital in Boston, and now she's doing that. And that's like her program, just the residency is 7 years, 5 years plus 2 research years, and that doesn't even include fellowship. So it could be 9 years after medical school. For her, is a lot of school.
That's crazy.
So the process is pretty brutal. People get very stressed about
Am I doing the math here? We're talking at least a decade and a half for her just to get through the entire education process post high school,
Yeah,
right?
because you have 4 years for undergrad, 4 years for medical school is 8 years for her on top of 9 years of residency and fellowship is 17 years.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's so much, and it's so much money,
it's
right?
so much money. This is just a joke. People like, have you disclosed your conflict of interest with House of Macadamia? I'm like, first of all, yes. Second of all, like, if you want to look in my bank account and wallet, like, I am not buying a Ferrari anytime soon, sir. Although I have gotten some nice generous support from mutual contacts, which has really helped.
If you had gone into residency, what do you think you would have gone with?
Probably pediatrics. I really love kids. So it's probably going to be pediatrics and endocrinology.
You have a kid-like energy.
I like it. I mean, it's yes, in certain respects. At some respects, I'm like a cranky old man, but in other respects, I'm like a kid. Like I was never like let's go out and party kind of person in high school, and even now, like my girlfriend would probably prefer to go like dancing at night. I'm like, can we like stay back and watch a Harry Potter movie, please? It's already like 8 o'clock. I want to be in bed by 10. So I'm not like but I like that. I
bet
like
kids
this thing
can
to have a kid. Well, I have a kid energy with kids.
Right, exactly. I could see kids connecting with like, you're gonna be a killer father. There's just no question.
The best comment I ever got in a YouTube video was, "These are platinum dad jokes." I made a bunch. I like with my puns.
Of course.
So when somebody's like, "These are platinum dad jokes," I'm like, pins. I do. It's this thing around being a kid that's so special that just brings out the levity in life. So like when you're in a doctor's office with a child, even a sick child, but they're like wanting to play peekaboo or hide and go seek like in the doctor's office. It's so much fun. And I don't mind getting on the ground and like making funny faces, making funny noises. Kids love this one. Like a crying baby, you just like make a little pop noise with your cheek. They'll be like bawling their eyes out and just go, and their eyes just look at you like, what was that? Oh my God. It's just so much fun.
It's distraction.
It's distract. Oh yeah, no, but I do love being around kids. I'm really looking forward to being a father one day. The timeline I'll have to work out with. I haven't asked permission to share her name on social media yet, so I'm not going to. But because of her training program and the hours therein, we have different ideas about when would be the optimal time to have kids. I don't really wanna wait
But
8
you're
more years.
already to that point. You're already chatting it out. I,
Oh,
uh,
we would have, powerhouse kids. They'd
I
be badasses.
oh, for sure. They're gonna be likewise super high achievers, and they're gonna have crazy supportive parents.
She also has a world title in, taekwondo.
I
What the
know, you were just sharing this with me. You gotta share the sleep schedule thing, or I should say the sleep circumstances.
um,
Or are you allowed
she
to?
I well, we'll find out if I get in trouble. Um, she's usually not private about those kind of things. I just don't wanna per se mention her name. She's a superhero that can go without sleep. I don't know how she does it, and I'm a very light sleeper. So one of the, difficult things in our relationship is, she would definitely not tolerate us sleeping in different beds, and so the degree to which she, gets up or wakes me up tends to be a problem, and, the thing you're referring to was, like I said, she's a badass martial artist, but, when she has, a lot on her mind, let's say, she sometimes engages in, some people sleepwalk, she sleeps, uh, martial which has become a problem for me at times.
Just a little practice
I've
in the
out of bed once or twice. There's the one time I put a pillow between us, and I don't know if you, like, roundhouse kneed me or something, but, like, I just, like, wake up with, like, a knee in my bladder, and I, like, roll onto the floor, and she's really strong, and I'm just
it's just it is so impressive that she is world class at something like that while also being a Harvard trained surgeon. Like, that's bananas.
well,
That's
I think,
crazy.
honestly, we select for or Harvard selects for people who are just, uh, obsessive to the well, not obs I shouldn't say obsessive, like, overachieving across the board to the point that generally we all have problems
It's
underneath.
like a
And I
mental
won't say, like, I don't, like, or that, like, I think all of us, like, do. You don't get to that level without being a certain level of
neurotic.
I shouldn't say that. Most people don't. I can think of 1 or 2 exceptions. My brother's one exception. I don't get him. He's a phenom. He's actually now matriculating this year to Harvard to do an MD PhD, so fully funded by Harvard. Finishing up his time at Cambridge as a, Gate Cambridge scholar, valedictorian 4.0 at WashU, brilliant kid, and he's so laid back, I don't get it. But with the exception of, like, 1 or 2 people like him, yeah, you generally put a lot of weight on your own shoulders.
Yeah.
She certainly does. Um,
I
but no, I know. Anyway, so I have to get some sleeping pads. We also have an ongoing debate about who would win in a fight. Just like, this is one of those moments like we were talking about Lane earlier. Well, I'm actually a pretty decent fighter, but I don't know.
it's not gonna be fair though. You're not gonna wanna
This is I'm saying it's a lose lose for me. I'm like, I'm not. First of all, I'm not gonna like try to hit you as hard as I can.
right.
And she's like, I will. I'm like, I bet you will. That's I'm sure you will. And so like, if I lose, okay, that kind of sucks. If but I like, what am I gonna do to win? She's like, I'm gonna get a concussion. It's fine. I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. She's like, ball up. I'm like, you win. All right, fine. This is over. Shoot, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't seen her fight.
So your relationship's already so interesting.
I might be just an overly cocky male. You don't know.
So going back to the choosing ultimately not to do residency, I may have been I was worried I was being a bad influence, but honestly, I I don't regret it at all. Watching what happened, it was I remember very well. It was December of the year before last, coming into January, when both the both Budoff's data had gotten released, which was great. It was the match analysis, and then the Oreo versus Statin. I had saw a level of dedication I cannot recall seeing from anybody on your efforts to highlight it, to get it out there, to broadcast it to a degree that I could not come to any conclusion other than this guy should be doing this. Like at any minimum, it should be a serious endeavor that you've got going on the side to be literally a content creator. And over the months following, I kept as I kept telling you as I was saying it, I don't want to be a bad influence, but you really could just be an incredible science communicator. You could just go all in on the social media front. And you were struggling a bit, but I could see the frog in the boiling water. it was moving over time.
Yeah.
And
I mean, at that point in time, I would have told you in 99% sure I need to do residency because it is like, there's an opportunity cost in either direction. It was a long deliberation. Um, and I talked to a lot of people, including my parents, contacts of my parents before I made the decision. And I think there were just, and I can only talk about certain opportunities, but there's so many opportunities knocking on my door that like if I were going to do at least another 5 years of residency and fellowship, say peds endo, like what I'd have to give up in that time, combined with the fact that
I mean, it matters if you're actually going to practice and how much you're gonna practice,
that's
right?
the thing is like I would be sitting, like, on a sub-internship, like, taking care of, like, patient notes, but my mind would be elsewhere. It would be like, I read a science paper this morning, and I just wanna tell a story around it. I can't wait to get home, not so I can watch TV and bum out, but so that, like, I can start to script out this narrative, imagine the story, and then read the next paper and do some more digging and figure out how can I communicate this to people? Like, that's where my mind was at, and I decided, "Look, it's not fair to me, it's not fair to the patients who deserve my full attention, or another peer who could take that residency spot and really commit to it." And, um, I think I think I would have been a fine doctor. I don't
Of
think it
course.
it was my calling. I don't think it's where I would have ever shown as a superstar, and I don't think I love clinical medicine as much as I wanted to, because it is such a admirable calling. Like the sacrifices physicians make, sacrifices my girlfriend makes, my parents make for their patients. It's so admirable. And you want to believe in yourself that you have that kind of selflessness to always put the patient first and be there caring for people. And so to be brutally honest with myself and to say, but I don't love this that much and I like scientific communication more was a big moment for me. And to be able to like articulate that outwardly, because there's almost a level of like shame in that admonition when you're someone who has built up that career path in your mind for so long, if that makes some degree of sense. And I don't think it should be shameful, which is why I'm talking about it.
But that's why I call it the easy, hard choice, right? In other words, the easy part is that the groundwork is laid. The track is laid down. It's hard to complete it, but the easy part is to get onto the track and to stay on the track that was laid before you, right? The hard choice was I'm actually going to go off this track everyone's expecting I'm gonna remain on. No question. Everything was leading up to this. To do this thing that's like new media, right? Like this isn't even.
It's not a well-worn path.
Yeah, well, let's say that you were, offered a job to be getting to, like, traditional media. Let's say that you were offered a job to be, like, the, medical consultant on CNN or something. That might be, like, more obviously and immediately understandable to a lot of people, like, "Oh, that's actually a really good job. You could put off residency for a little bit to do that if it
Yeah.
you could have a really big career doing it that way." A lot of folks in your space, I think, don't grasp the new media potential and how important it can be, especially in the area of, like,
Yeah.
nutrition and
And you can't
science.
convince them. Like my parents don't get social media. So like trying to convince them without them like having any social media accounts. Like every now and then they'll watch one of my YouTube videos and like, that was nice. I'm like, "You're really good at this," but it's like, how is this gonna be a career? Or like, I mean, I think now they are seeing the impact because they've gotten more involved since I made this decision. They've been super supportive. Um, but did the easy hard choice thing, I mean, also there's just a matter of like the amount of time that I've invested in this path. I mean, I will not say that I'm like, I don't believe in a self-made person. Let me put it that way. Like, you need support.
Yeah.
And I've had incredible support and privilege along my journey. Nevertheless, getting into the schools I've gotten into, graduating where I graduated in my classes, like, like going through college in a cell biochem major with a 4.0 GPA, then doing a PhD, then doing medical school, getting into medical school with current admission rates, like the amount I have put in to this trajectory to only then say, yeah, I'm quote giving it up to go off and do other things where the standard perspective is like people have all this anxiety around match because if you don't match into your thing, then you're the failure. You're the loser who didn't match. Yeah, despite all this time and effort you put into your education, this is the moment when you're going to become a clinician. So to not match is often seen or can be felt like a failure. To say I'm not even gonna try when my whole thing is shooting the long shot, that was a big decision. But I have no doubt now that it's the right decision for me. It was just a scary one and one that, look, there's not a really clear path. Um, Bringing up my girlfriend again because we were talking about this, literally yesterday, was she's like, "I wanna know more about your career. Like, can you, like, lay out for me exactly what your career trajectory is and tell me, like, what the plan is and when you're traveling for X, Y, and Z?" I'm like, "Honestly, like, I can't. I really can't." And so you kinda have to become comfortable with the unknown. And like I said earlier, building the road ahead of you, like, laying the bricks as you're walking it. And I've found that I actually love that.
I honestly feel like it's safer compared to every so for one, without discussing everything, you have a greater diversification of revenue potential
Mhm.
from I mean, it's not just YouTube AdSense. You've got other things that you've got worked out that come from heading in this direction. And that's usually better when considering things like income security, right?
I mean, like, if you go into medicine, you're gonna have a job. I would say from an income security standpoint at this point in time, I would have, quote, "more job security" if I had gone the residency route. I
Job
don't think it
security, but I
and
think
it
your upward potential
the up
is
the ceiling the potential ceiling is much, much lower being a doctor or clinician than what I'm doing. That's true. No, I mean, like, you talking about, like, yeah, transparency. Like, I could make a lot of money.
can I
I'm gonna invest it in certain things. I'm not buying a fancy car anytime soon, but, like, in terms of income potential, I mean, like, think about, like, Peter Attia, Joe Rogan, Andrew Huberman. Like, think about what their bank accounts probably look like.
right.
It doesn't mean they're not in it. Like, you listen to Joe Rogan, like, I think he's just a dude who wants to have a conversation. I don't think he really cares about being a 100 millionaire, but he makes the money because he has the platform. Same with Huberman. I don't think he feels like he needs multi-million dollars, but he's gonna make it. The opportunity's right there. The cheddar's right there. You're just gonna be like, all right, you know? Peter Thiel, I think, is more deliberate about it, but I don't knock him for having taken business opportunities. So, yes, there is a lot of potential in that sphere. And to double down on why that's valuable, it's not just valuable for a cushy lifestyle, but like the kind of research I want to do, I'm not getting 10, $20 million from the NIH to do the carnivore versus vegan inflammatory bowel disease RCT that I want to do. I will never get it. I can get it through philanthropists. And those are the doors that are opening up. Or let's say I want to start like a metabolic, a rehab center that's also a research center. And I've talked about this with people already. That would probably be $100 million investment upfront. Where am I going to get that money? Networks that I'm building doing this alternative path, which is high risk, but I think the potential benefits on the impact I can have on the world are so much more.
Well, honestly, I feel like a lot of this comes back to your ability to be reciprocal. So when you're a big social media presence, then the philanthropy has a little bit more of a payoff coming back in the other direction. You can highlight what they're doing for making this happen. So you yourself can be the bullhorn
Mhm.
that's saying, yes, founded by the, philanthropic blah, 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 etc.
Yeah.
So it's more than just you've got scientific rigor, you've got good scientific ideas. The lesser known but very proper scientist, that's something they're up against is the lesser known component. Whereas an Andrew Huberman, a Peter Attia, et cetera, it's their name has equity in and of itself. And so that can be a further component that can incentivize this research. Please do that, the vegan versus carnivore. I
I'd love
I'd
to.
love to see that as an
Maybe Mr.
RTG,
Beast can help
especially.
us out with it.
That's true. That's very Mr. Beast.
So the
That
reason I think all of this is you know where I'm going with this, but like the weird connections that arise, and one that like was literally a couple days ago. And to be clear, I've not had any dialogue with Jimmy, who's Mr. Beast, but one of my backers. Oh, I'll just say it. I think I'm allowed to say it. I can check with her if we can edit this out if I'm not allowed to say it. But the Bazuki family has been very generous to me. They're involved in the metabolic health space because their son, Matt Bazuki, this is all common knowledge, was treated by Chris Palmer for bipolar disorder with incredible effect. So it mobilized them and their resources to invest in metabolic health. Now, if I was just sitting in an intern res room, not engaging in social media, we would have never been connected. Now the Mr. Beast thing rolls in because serendipitously I find out that Mr. Beast has Crohn's disease. You can Google this. I'm pretty sure it's accurate information. which is an inflammatory bowel disease, very similar to what I had. So now you're in this sphere on, oh, lo and behold, the David Bazooki might be entering into a business relationship with Mr. Beast. Maybe I can get him a letter. Say, hey, in case you want to talk about inflammatory bowel disease, because I know it's a really hard diagnosis, I have it. Let's have a chat. Oh, and by the way, I'm a creative PhD, soon to be MD PhD, who's done some pretty impressive metabolic stunts, like lowering my LDL cholesterol 71% with Oreo cookies, combining some of my thoughts about metabolism with your creativity and resources. What could we do? Including things that end up as peer reviewed publications, but that can also have a media spin. We see this integration now all the time with media and science. Go back to the Chris Gardner vegan documentary. The twin study was, yeah, we're wrapped into into like a Netflix documentary. Why couldn't I do that with Mr. Beast? Vegan versus carnivore, So hopefully we can get this to Mr. Beast and he can have a conversation. To be clear, again, none of that is precipitated, but I bring it up as a transparent case in point of like, I don't know what the road ahead of me has, but that was literally a brick that came up within the last few days. They're like, oh, that's an interesting brick. Let's put it down and let's see if anything comes of it, and it might not, but they come up like multiple times a week. It's like, oh, you can connect with this person. You can connect with that person. You can go over to India and meet these people that'll help you set up a, metabolic health education platform over in India, which is something I'm going to be doing in the second half of this year. Like the opportunities are crazy. And they're just so fun.
Yeah. It's again watching this all unfold. I wanted to fit in one more thing before getting off the residency decision. For me, I think what I perceived as the clincher, I don't know if it was the same for you, but it was for me while you were in this deciding phase, was the 720 eggs experiment. I feel like for me, at that point I was like, oh, he's going to make the decision to go content development wise. There's just no question.
I think I made the decision before that. When did I drop the egg video? What month was it?
It was, I want to say May of last year, April of last year. Yeah, it was.
Oh,
I remember because it was before the summer. And we both agreed that while it was an interesting experiment, of the experiments both of us were contemplating, we didn't think that it would probably be the banger, the full-blown banger that it was, but
literally, yeah.
It exploded. It was the new wave, and it was also the first time you got to enjoy, like, a significant, very material spike to your X account, because while your Instagram was already blasting off, Instagram's easier to grow a following on. X is actually kinda challenging, it's more precipitous, but you had, I wanna say 2,500 added
Oh, I
in,
think it's like 10,000.
oh, is it 10,000? Yeah, in
Yeah.
like a matter of a few days or something like that.
Creeping close to that 100K. I think about 99K right now.
Yeah, I thought you already were past 100K by this point, but
I go up and down. As a kind of funny aside, I posted about Chris McCaskill.
Mhm.
I lost like 300 followers immediately,
Oh,
like in like 2 hours. I'm like, all right, pruning the tree here.
yeah.
That I don't really mind. No, I mean the follower count, things like that aren't as material as the quality of the followers, and I have some great community. YouTube's been growing the fastest by far, which I'm proud of because it's where I put the most effort. Twitter is now a little bit of a offhand thought, but it's where we started, and I still like Twitter more than Instagram. But what were we talking about? Oh yeah, the egg thing. That was bananas. I mean, like literally. I mean, the video is fine. It has something like 500,000 views, but like the cross-platform coverage, legacy media, other forms of media. I was getting screenshots of people like, you have 143 million hits on TikTok. I'm like, I'm not even on TikTok. Not 143,000, 143 million.
Wow.
So yeah, like
Wait, if you're not even on TikTok, somebody just copied your thing over?
they could Daily Mail like,
Oh, I see.
stuff with me.
Gotcha.
Like, so and it just went absolutely bananas viral. I was getting international offers to fly around the world because of eggs, and Vital Farms did offer me a free year of eggs. So I like to, in this spirit of transparency, I'm now for the next half year bought off by Big Egg, being bribed by free delicious golden yolk Vital Farms eggs while everybody else is in the egg shortage.
Before this year, that might not have been considered very consequential, but now
Now I know.
that's such a commodity.
I know. Well, I had no that was like they actually caught on to it very quickly, like, because I bought the eggs for the experiment, I had no, like, bribe by them to do anything. It was after the fact that it's like, "Our egg genie is gonna grant you a year of free eggs." I'm like, "I'm a med student, I'll take this. I'll take this in a heartbeat, are you kidding?" Um, so that's a funny aside. But, yeah. Hey, Vital Farms, where are my 2025 tokens? They haven't sent them yet, so I've actually had to purchase eggs off my own dime for the last month and a bit, which has been catastrophic. I did go to, Whole Foods for the first time ever in my life and see no eggs at one point in time.
Wow.
There were no eggs on the shelves. Um, and it only happened once, but, like, yeah, it's egg shortage. It's bird flu, right? It's like a bird flu going around?
Yeah, I
Something
don't
like that?
remember what the reason was. It's true. I went to the store recently. I didn't see any. I was kind of flying in and out. Although right now we have some leftover wagyu from
Oh.
Kosai from the Fogo de Chao dinner. So I've been eating a lot of wagyu leftovers,
The real reason
which
Shave hosts Kosai.
that's exactly. It's a long game to just get some spillover leftovers from the dinner.
That's a good tangent to the number of jokes about, "Oh, Dave, you just did the standard American vegan to standard American diet crossover so you could just eat junk food."
Yeah, God, yeah.
Aren't those your favorite comments?
Yeah, actually, you know what? This is let me segue real quick because you had so I wanted to do a junk food to vegan experiment to demonstrate the lipid energy model. You were like, "That's cool." And you ended up doing a companion. You ended up doing yours ahead of mine. But the when I did mine, yeah, it was really interesting because foods I hadn't eaten since even before keto. For 2 weeks, I was just carte blanche eating all kinds of things I had never eaten before. I really was curious as to what the experience would be like. And I don't wanna say I was on death's door having a terrible time per se, but will I say it impacted my productivity? Yes. Did it impact my sleep? Yes. Did I spend a lot more time in the bathroom? Yeah, I did. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people don't get, that I try to emphasize that is a good thing about N of 1 experiments, is if you're the instigator of it, if it's a planned experiment that's gonna hit at a certain time, last for a certain time, ends at a certain time, the benefit is you have a clean signal of what the diet really does do to you. Whereas most of the time when people go off diet, like if they've been really adherent to a diet, often there's some catalyst, such as they got fired from their job, there's a divorce, or just something that's considered a good thing, like the holidays or whatever. But then you're confounded because you don't know if it's the stress of the event or it's the meeting certain family, and that's why I was extra sleepy and extra tired, and that's why I couldn't focus too much or anything like that. If there's anything I feel I can say with a lot of confidence, and I know you can too, it's that when you're intentionally leaving the diet after being on something that's working so well for you, the signal's crisp. Like you can really tell the difference. And yeah, some experiments, I know you can also speak to this too. I don't know how much you want to. Some of my experiments made me feel cavalier that it is that simple. I'm turning it off, I'm turning it back on again. Cool, no problem. Some experiments wrecked me for a while.
Yeah.
One of the biggest ones was the second version of my added sugar experiment. So I had a first version that was a year earlier. I was adding Skittles to my baseline keto diet, and in the course of doing it, I figured out that actually it was very relevant as to whether I ate it first or second. So if I had the Skittles before eating the keto, or if I ate the keto meal first and then added the Skittles after, turned out to be kind of relevant. At some point, we'll have to talk about that because it
Which was
also
worse behaviorally?
it was worse to eat it first, to have the Skittles before the keto diet.
Mm.
It
Why?
w
In what way?
I'd have to pull the data, but for one, it's interesting. It messed with the profile, but also it
The
was
lipid profile.
yeah, messed with the lipid profile. D Not that I'm necessarily, making a value judgment on it, but if you were to make a value judgment on it, it looked like a worse lipid profile.
Huh.
But the other component was, satiation. It was a lot weirder, a lot more difficult to work with eating that first and having the keto meal because I wasn't as satiated, even though it's literally the same exact meal.
So after the keto meal, if you had the Skittles first, you then felt hungrier after? Like,
Yes.
more to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
Just literally exactly the same meal, right?
Interesting.
Every time. So but the second time I did it, I was doing an experiment that I kind of co-designed with Paul Mason. And it actually was, I was doing carnivore, and capturing wide spectrum data at that. And then at the tail end of the carnivore, I did an added sugar experiment that was for 4 days. And it was my baseline diet again, but with dextrose. I added dextrose in the form of bottle caps for 4 days. It was just 4 days. But at the end of those 4 days, something really interesting happened. I really craved junk food. Like, I really wanted junky sweets, junky anything. And what I tried to do is I tried to mitigate it by just going for keto-like things, so, like, Quest cookies, and I tried to, make some fat bombs and that kinda stuff, but I couldn't stop eating them. I was just so and I specifically was craving it. I was gaining weight, I was frustrated, and it wasn't it didn't feel like I could get satisfied enough. I had to just keep, like, consciously holding it back, and that lasted for almost a month,
Huh.
for about 3.5 weeks,
Yeah.
and I was so frustrated. I was like, "How did this happen? Why did 4 days of doing this mess with me so much?" Because I had had other experiments where I added carbs or I swapped carbs, and it didn't have this much of an effect. But that bugged me a lot. Then there was my weight gain experiment, which was in 2018. Cavalierly, I thought, "Oh, you know what? I can do this for 6 weeks." It happens to coincide, when my wife and I are having, I think it was our 10-year anniversary or something like that, and we were traveling at the time as well. And so, hey, right? Gets back to where what you were leading off to. Hey, I get to eat the food I want to eat that's bad for me on purpose to gain weight. So I had a lot of burgers with buns and lots of them. I had a lot of pizza and lots of pizza. And sure enough, I gained 19 pounds and my lipid profile changed,
Improved, quote unquote.
improved, right? My LDL dropped, my LDLP dropped, my PLA2 dropped, right? All the good stuff. Hey, my ox-LDL dropped, by the way, which also tracks with my expectation. And then I took RER testing before and after. I took DEXA scans. I guess we never really unpacked this one, but at some point we should chat about it. And then I took wide spectrum blood tests coming off of it, going back into keto. But I never lost the weight that I was all the way at the baseline.
How much of the 19 did you lose?
I lost, I want to say 10 to 11 pounds. But I was regularly hovering around, I want to say 181 and 182 before the weight gain experiment. And
You're
then
what, 6'3", just so people know,
6'3",
like, you're a tall
right,
guy.
right. And then I pretty much averaged, 191, 192 for some period of time after that. Now I'll get closer to like 185 sometimes, but I almost never hover to what I was regularly hovering at before that.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
so there's a long-term impact due to an experiment. Granted, an experiment where I'm literally gaining weight, but long-term effect.
Yeah, no, I mean,
But the biggest one is the white bread and processed meat experiment. Lots of anxiety, lots of irritability, like very notable irritability. Siobhan, not making this up, Siobhan literally said, "If you ever do this experiment again, I want to take time off from working with you because,"
really?
yeah. And I was
Never
like,
seen that, Dave.
yeah, I was. There's this one moment during that experiment, during this white bread and processed meat experiment, that I noticed my own irritability levels in real time. I was on a morning walk, and I'm walking, and I was frustrated about something. I don't even know what I was frustrated about. And I'm walking down the sidewalk, and I'm maybe 15 feet from the street that's ahead of me, right? I'm on the sidewalk, the street's ahead of me, and this car, like, turns. Again, I'm, like, 15 feet away, and I'm already like, "Jesus." That car almost like it was just aggressively trying to cut me off or something like that, and I had this moment where I'm just I'm just like, "What the hell is happening?"
It's
That
weird when you
I'm
have the, like, out of body, like, "Wait a minute. Who is this person?"
That's what that was. Like, I couldn't believe I was
Mhm.
frustrated by it. Like, I would never be frustrated by something like that. And, yeah, it was this weird reflective, like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences. The fallout of the honey versus bacon, or the bacon honey experiment was probably the worst. And it's not like because honey is worse than Oreos, which I got through. It's just like you're rolling the dice with each of these things.
Yeah.
And the fallout for that, I ended up having more of a flare, like a UC flare for the first time in a long time because I was eating 85 grams of honey per day. And it just took a long time to go away. And of course, that also has knock-on effects on your like social relationships, your mental health. Speaking about frustration, I think it was during that time I had this like the first time I probably ripped into you a little bit. I'm remembering.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was like a Twitter exchange and you like volunteered me for something. I'm like, why the fuck would you volunteer me for this thing? Like, I don't have time for this right now. This nuisance. She's like, I just meant it as a friendly comment. I'm like, not right now, Dave. Like, why? And it was just because like I was feeling like absolute shit. There probably was a direct effect on my mental health, but just like what this stuff, this these experiments take a toll. They're not easy. Some are
Well,
easier, but
there's that uncertainty component, right? It's not like we can plan for the bad effects when it's unknown whether there will be.
some of them you have to brace for, though. Like
Yeah.
Oreo, I braced for. The irony is 720 eggs, which was the most fruitful for me, was the easy. It was so easy.
Right.
People are like, "How do you do it?" I'm like, "Eating 2 dozen eggs a day." Because many ways you can do it. Whatever. I just had 2 different
I
large omelets.
could do right now. Like, if I thought there would be a lot of value in
But
replicating
it's
it.
not even unpleasant. That's the thing, is, like,
Right.
it's funny. So, the most pleasant N equals 1 I've probably done was the most beneficial for, social media purposes, but no, the other ones, me during Oreo versus Statin, I was just was literally bouncing off the walls. Um, Chris had the screenshot from his, YouTube where I announced Oreo versus Statin during COSI, remember?
Well, I didn't
Oh,
get
you
to
did?
watch all the
Okay.
presentations, so.
Yeah, he had the one where my hair is, like, all, like, crazy and
Oh, right, because you were kind of
I was on
weak
Oreos.
at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a disconcerting feeling. Then you come off it. Also, but to the satiation thing, I remember my experience with the Oreos, and I'd always eat them after meals, but I didn't enjoy them as much as I thought. I remember loving Oreos, but they were, like, kind of grainy. They weren't even that sweet, um, and they definitely weren't rich. They just kinda tasted like if I took some sugar and put it in chalk to me, but I had this really annoying feeling where after I ate them, my stomach would hurt and I'd be hungry, but not hungry. I'd want to eat more. I didn't even enjoy them.
Yeah,
And I'd still be like, I'm hungry, but my stomach is full. And to your point of like the crisp signal, I'd never thought about that. Like maybe I had experienced it as a teenager. It's been so long since I wasn't like keto and eating a standard diet, but I'm like, I am actively uncomfortably full, but I also want to eat more.
and I'm sorry, I just don't. I'm gonna sound like a total advocate for keto. It just doesn't happen to me when I'm very fully keto.
Yeah.
I don't get stuffed with steak, and then I'm like, "Oh, I could eat a little more." No, I'm satiated long before I feel really stuffed with
Yeah.
steak. Now, something like fat bombs, like a more refined version of something fatty, okay, good example is a heavy whipping cream shake. I could down 1,000 calories of a heavy whipping cream shake pretty easily. But steak, eggs, salmon, I cannot overeat those. It's just not gonna happen.
But even if you do indulge to the point that you're, like, very full, because maybe you just get, like, a big portion for whatever reason, then you're just not hungry until it's appropriate to be hungry again. Like, on a higher carb diet, if I had a Thanksgiving dinner of, like, 5,000 calories, including, like, pie and whatever, like, the next morning, I'd be hungry again.
Right.
I think the fullest or most, quote, "satiated" I've ever been was, I was taking like, a long international trip, and I had just opened a bag of, macadamia nuts, like a full kilo, and I just ate the whole bag. Like, I literally ate a kilogram of macadamia nuts over the course of a day, um, and I was very full, and then I wasn't hungry for, like, 2 days. Like, maybe, like, I picked at 1 or 2 things, but I just wasn't hungry. I had a lot of energy, but, my body was just like, "You're good. You got some energy." And, like, I kinda forced myself to, like, "Oh, I'll have a little smoked salmon," but, like, I just wasn't hungry for a few days, and then I was hungry again. That was such a different experience. You don't have to monitor, you just, like, eat and then run off the fuel you've consumed.
And that's kinda how I
In
think of
theory.
diet in general is I try to explain this to my family who are more diabetic, that you can go online, you can go on social media, you can find people who are on a higher carb diet and they're metabolizing it well. They're doing great, right?
I mean, by all outwards appearances, I was that person.
Yeah, right. But when you find out that you do have a challenge
Mhm.
with regulating glucose in your body, and we can argue about how you got to that state. There's lots of room for argumentation there, right? But whether or not taking steps to lower your carbohydrates might be beneficial if you're in that circumstance, I feel like there's just less options. And oftentimes, I would agree with the way Ben Bikman says it. A lot of weight loss diets are ultimately low insulin diets.
Yeah.
Seems pretty obvious when you say it that way. By the same token, a lot of means by which you're typically going to be managing your diabetes re- is whatever results in less glucose that ends up in your bloodstream. If you metabolize it well, that's great. Then that's what you do, right? You just burn it off. If you can do that, if you can leverage exercise to whatever degree you want to take in carbs, okay, cool. That's a great way of doing it, but depends on if that's where you're at.
Yeah. And also in respect to the, like, insulin resistant state, the, like, law of smaller numbers, like, smaller inputs and outputs, it's easier to control in a certain zone. So, like, while in theory it sounds nice, "Oh, you have diabetes, just, quote, cover with insulin if you need to take insulin," like, first of all, there's iatrogenic effects of insulin. Higher insulin levels for longer has direct negative effects on health, but also it's just, like, you can't really control it that easily. Like, you can't have maybe, I guess you can. Let's say it's very hard to have diabetes, eat a high carb diet, high sugar diet, and then cover with insulin to a point that you have actually like stable glucose levels. You just can't replicate what the pancreas is doing. Again, setting aside the negative effects of high insulin levels for a prolonged period of time. But you cut out the dietary source of glucose and you tend to have pretty good results, including in type 1. Um, we know a couple people I'm sure that are jumping to mind, 1 or 2 that I won't name because of their presence in a certain upcoming movie, um, but who, yeah, have remarkable results with carbohydrate restricted diets. But it's just not part of the social norms. It's just not on the menu, um, not part of the culture yet, but it's becoming more and more mainstream because more and more people are just doing it, and then it works, and then they tell the story.
I think a major game change is coming when it's a non-invasive wearable. When your Apple Watch has your glucose on it,
There was just a paper on that. I haven't read it. It's on my reading list. There's more and more, but
the
no, I
the
think so.
game is gonna change. I think a lot of people are gonna, because what is it? It's an oral glucose tolerance test that's always on, right? So I have my bag of Doritos and I go, "Oh, oh, man, my glucose is still way up there in this range up here." People will be writing software in 5 minutes, even if the providers of it don't. That'll already have craft, you know, OGTT built right into it and be like, "Hmm, so you're still at 180 3 hours after your meal. I don't know." And it's gonna be like these Oura rings, it's gonna be something where it says, "Don't know about where you're at in this." And I think there'll be more self-corrected behavior from a non-invasive wearable than probably what many of the doctors these days have tried to accomplish in the aggregate.
Yeah, I mean, there's tremendous power in biofeedback. The 1 year data of the TORD trial, so Tro's clinic, is coming out Friday. Um, I know because I'm an author on the paper. I'll have a video I drop on it. This won't drop until after that, so I'm just going to speak about it. But mean weight loss in the intention to treat group was 15.5% body weight, which is actually, like, better than a GLP-1, and some people in the trial actually came off GLP-1s. They were using, in part, continuous glucose meters, and Tro could speak to this as the treating clinician, but, like, the power of that biofeedback to inspire behavior change and get results that, yeah, in this case, granted it was a multimodal intervention, including a ketogenic diet, and education and other things, but, like, you can get via behavior better results than pharmacotherapy and save money along the way. It just needs to become more part of the norm because people are doing it, but they're just utilizing these tools, building these communities. And rather than asking why are these outliers, we just go back to the, oh, well, most people can't do it, so X, Y, and Z, rather than trying to really address the norms. And it's a difficult thing because it's a nuanced conversation. It's not to say that, say a GLP-1, semaglutide, Ozempic, Wegovy don't have a role. They do. I think they actually can be really great for the right patients, and I think they have effects beyond weight loss. Nevertheless, you don't want to miss the forest for a tree and not say, well, actually, if we educate people and empower them with their own data, including CGMs, we can get these results through lifestyle. This is doable. And I feel like people feel like it's not doable because these tools haven't been broadly adopted. In fact, we can talk a little bit about this, but like it's funny how controversial CGMs are.
I think I was just chatting about this with Nick. I'm dumbfounded, honestly. And frankly, I'm just going to state it plainly. I feel like it's a little bit of this kind of anti-low carb sentiment, the anti-low carb community sentiment, whatever the low carb community seems to be getting into. It's almost as if the same folks who are critical of the low carb community for one reason, it's almost like they just as rapidly developed this other reason because the low carb community is into it. And CGMs are probably one of the best examples because there's no pushback on glucometers, and glucometers you can buy over the counter right now, and you could just test multiple times a day with a glucometer.
CGMs too. Now
you can't.
No,
I know that, but what I'm saying is that there wasn't a pushback on people finding out that their glucose was high after a meal from a glucometer. It's almost as if CGMs, because it was the new hotness within the low carb community, suddenly got this attention to try to argue against people making use of it. But here's my biggest pushback. There's some number of people right now who are diabetic and don't know they're diabetic. That's why I think the wearables are going to make a big difference.
On their way too. They have on their resistance and their soda's spiking their blood sugar to 230 and they don't even know it.
Exactly. And so for those folks, I love the idea of them getting a CGM to just at least find that out. If the major counter argument is, hey, people are getting a CGM and then they're pathogenizing any increase in glucose.
Including exercise. People have made that claim. My patients aren't going to exercise because they have a CGM. Like, okay.
Yes. I've yet to see any of this, by the way. But
no, I think it's an absurd argument.
But are there going to be some people who, with any new device, with any new metric, take things too far? Of course. That's always going to be the case. Do I think that there's a net benefit with CGMs? I think it's not even close.
Right. The analogy I was using, you could tell me if you think it's a fair one or not, but like bathroom scales. Like people can misuse bathroom scales as a tool.
I think it's a great analogy. Great analogy.
Do we say that the public should not have access to bathroom scales? No. We're just like, all right, this is a tool. You should use it well. If you're using it poorly, don't use it or become educated in how to use it. There we go.
Like imagine somebody going, yeah, but you realize if you gain muscle, then that'll actually increase on a bathroom scale. Because of that one edge case, I want to be sure that we just don't have any bathroom scales because you can understand it.
Some people might laugh, but it's legitimately a fair analogy.
It is. I agree.
Yeah. What other trendy things are popular to attack in the low carb space? We got CGMs, we got carnivore.
Well, we got to talk about fiber. So,
all right.
Fiber necessary, true or false?
It's not necessary.
It's not necessary.
No, nobody's going to argue it's necessary. I mean, people.
What are you talking about? A lot of people argue it's necessary.
Well, then they're not using the word necessary correctly. Frankly. So people do that with a lot with terminologies like, this diet is unsustainable. I'm like, you might not like it, but like I know people have been doing it for like 15 years. So you can't say unsustainable because if one person can sustain it, it is no longer unsustainable. Do you need fiber to live? No, the answer is no.
But
it's not necessary.
If I'm playing devil's advocate, they'll say, but those people will live a shorter life than if they did have fiber. That fiber is longevity producing, right? That you're feeding your gut microbiome. You're going to have, greater health benefit from ultimately having fiber.
Necessary to live a longer life. I mean, like that would be.
I didn't say I would be a good devil's advocate. I'm just saying.
I feel like there are like data on like having a pet dog being like good for health outcomes. So like, would you argue that like to be healthy, it is necessary that you have a dog, and if you don't have a dog, you are therefore not healthy. It's the same argument. It's like, no. And again, like going back to the comments around carnivore before and possibilities, this is all about just like what are the possibilities. I actually think, on balance, all things being equal, if you can tolerate it, more diverse fibers from more diverse foods, I'd probably hedge my bets on that being better for you rather than worse. At a very high level, the way I think about it is ecosystems, be it a rainforest or a coral reef or your microbiome. Ecosystems are most resilient to external stressors when they're more diverse. So if you think about metabolic health as in part being resilient to external stressors, part of that could be having a diverse microbiome. Now, there are caveats to that. Diversity isn't everything. In fact, there was just a paper that came out on the Restore diet, which was looking at non-industrial, like if could you reverse the impact of an industrialized diet. I did, full disclosure, I haven't fully read the paper. It's on my reading list. I think it came out like literally like this morning. Doing my scrolling not through social media, but through like Cell and Nature, as I tend to do at 4 a.m. One of the things I saw, granted again, just in like the abstract and like a quick skim, was that um, there were improvements and the microbiome that they classified associated with improvements in like cardiometabolic factors, but microbiome diversity went down. Now, to be clear, this wasn't an animal-based diet. It was more plant-based. I did skim through the diet design, but the point there being, the things that we think about is like the virtue signaling elements, like, oh, more diversity is better.
Pull the mic closer to you real quick.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, like more diversity is better. That's not where the be all end all is. So I'm not confident in saying you need fiber to have a healthy microbiome. I'm definitely not confident in that, but on balance, all things being equal, right now, given the literature and its caveats, I would say you probably do derive some benefits from fiber. But I don't eat fiber, or not much fiber, because it irritates my IBS, which is different than IBD. Irritable bowel syndrome is not inflammatory bowel disease. So I can eat fiber and stay in remission from IBD, but I get more flatulence. My, bowel movements are less comfortable, and honestly, like, just I spend more time in the bathroom, and it's not good for my quality of life. So I choose not to eat it. And in fact, there's literature showing that fiber can be inflammatory for some people. About a third of people. Granted, those tend to be people with lower microbiome diversity at baseline. So the question arises, well, can you train their microbiome to have the anti-inflammatory response? Sorry, did I say anti-inflammatory? I meant pro-inflammatory. One third of people have a pro-inflammatory response to fiber. Most have an anti-inflammatory. So there is a diverse response. Um, schema. So I think it's highly individualized. I think the idea that fiber is good for you, more fiber is better, is way too simplistic. I don't think fiber is bad for you. I think on balance in the population, fiber from real foods probably has some benefits. Although again, it's going to correlate with things like eating a lower glycemic load diet. At a population level, those who eat more fiber are going to eat lower glycemic load diets in general, because most people aren't eating a carnivore diet or a keto diet. But it's definitely not necessary. So it's a very individualistic thing. I can speak to benefits of fiber that I could imagine, but I'm also very comfortable not eating fiber. And I don't think that makes me an unhealthy person, nor do I necessarily think it's going to curtail my longevity. But you can ask me in 90 years.
All right, let's go and jump into seed oils.
Yeah.
So
I actually just want to say before we start this conversation, this came to my mind when we're talking about N=1, because I think there's a big deficiency of good human trials in this space. I would love to see certain folks, knock knock, Tucker Goodrich, do an N=1, where they have a very tightly controlled, calorie macro controlled diet, and to the best of their ability, they just swap the fat profiles. Use, say, more sesame oil, less tallow, and then track outcomes, biomarker outcomes over a sufficiently long enough period of time that we could hopefully see, and this is the difficult thing, metabolic shifts based on changing tissue levels. Because a short-term trial won't capture that. A week's not going to work, so it needs to be months, which makes it very difficult.
well, especially if you're already very anti-seed oil to begin with, you specifically don't want to consume it for that very reason.
Yeah, but I'm anti-Oreo in terms of health metrics. You're anti-Skittles.
I mean, it depends on how bad you think something is as to whether or not you're willing to experiment with it or not.
Or how much you care about getting the data out there. So if you care about
I
the
mean,
science more than you care about taking a health hit for a bit, then
which I have my bona fides. Like I said, I gained 19 pounds to show what would happen.
I have mine as well.
Yeah, that's for sure. But your your point's well taken. I will say the area that I've been especially interested in that both Tucker Goodrich and Kate, I'm forgetting her last name right offhand, but the one who did Dark Calories, um, they they both brought up, and at some point I want to do deep dive on literally the bilayer of the cells of people who consume a very high level of these linoleic acid oils.
How are they consuming the linoleic acid? Is it more processed food, junk food, or are they eating walnuts?
It's my assumption it's the former, right?
Right.
But regardless of what the food delivery is, if the actual cells themselves of these folks as a proportion have a higher proportion in those bilayers
Mhm.
of their cells actually do have a higher proportion of PUFAs for the legs of the phospholipids. I know I'm getting a bit geeky here, but such that literally the composition of the cells themselves have greater fluidity,
Yes.
not necessarily in a good way, but who knows? I would find that super fascinating. If there literally was a structural change in people due to that degree of consumption of seed oils.
So I think that the question we need to ask, which has not been addressed, is how correlative is that relationship? How much does consumption, when you're intensity controlling for diet quality, importantly, and baseline metabolic health, how much does consumption actually influence membrane levels in different tissues? Because different tissues are going to be different, and how does that impact health?
Right.
So I don't. The thing is, I don't like people presenting double standards, and the way I see it is a lot of literature cited on, seed oil consumption. It's like, well, it's kind of like when somebody cites, a meat-based diet, but people eating like lasagna and, Big Macs from McDonald's, and then citing that as like a meat-heavy diet. I see it as very different than a carnivore diet, like the way it's practiced by many people with like clean, just red meat.
But you see why I like this in particular? Because this literally does get down. I mean, this is an apportionment process. Even if there's a different kind, even if the consumption is more junk food laden and so forth, the actual polyunsaturated fats themselves, you either consume them or you actually synthesize them. It's unlikely that these are synthesized polyunsaturated fats. We do have monounsaturated fats that we make that are not palmitic is the saturated, but I forget what the palmitoleic, right, is the unsaturated. But we don't have anything comparable to the quantity level of polyunsaturated fats that would come to like literally changing the structure of the cells to this degree is the best of my understanding.
You do need to get them exogenously, like
Right.
ALA and LA are essential fatty acids. Like you can't synthesize them, and then they're the basis for so for omega 3s.
So you have to have some consumption of your cell bilayers, have to, with these polyunsaturated fats.
Yeah, but you're definitely. I mean, unless you like eat a zero fat diet, you're gonna get them. So I'm not
Right,
saying
right.
you need to target them. I mean, I will say omega 3s, and you probably should go after EPA and DHA because the conversion of ALA to EPA DHA is pretty low.
But that's
But in
why
terms of linoleic acid, you're gonna get it in your diet.
but that's why I'm saying it's the proportion that I'm really targeting. If the proportion of the cell bilayer is substantially different, right? That would be super fast.
As a function of intake.
Correct.
Okay, now let's pause and say, what is the trial you'd want to see to demonstrate that?
I don't know on the trial because you're talking something prospective, right? I've got to imagine that takes years, if not decades. I have to imagine that because
Months, probably.
you're talking about body-wide compositional change of the cell bilayers where you could actually detect
Yep.
that much of a proportional difference.
I mean,
That's a lot.
one of the issues with the seed oil space is the data are limited because of just how difficult it will be to do the rigorous trials in order to collect what I think of the relevant data, which have to do with metabolic manifestations of tissue level changes. So it's a difficult study to do, and I will not hold it against people for the fact that that data has not been collected, but in terms of like the strength of the claims we make about things like some people think that seed oils are like the cause of obesity. If you're going to make a very firm claim, you need to at least acknowledge what data are lacking and why they're lacking, and what data might next need to be collected in order to fill out this narrative, because it has become such a prominent narrative in certain circles.
I I'm not sure on obesity. I think if I'm steel manning their position, a lot of it comes back to heart disease in particular.
I think
Yeah, there's some emphasis on cancer, but I'm not sure. But in particular, heart disease, it's probably one of the most
I
common.
have heard obesity. So the thing is, like, a lot of people are making different messages. So when we talking about, I mean, I did a response video on seed oils, and the first thing is like, let's define what we're talking about. If we're talking about oxidized, overheated fryer oil at McDonald's, I'm saying don't drink the fryer oil. And I don't think it's just because of the calorie load. Like some people think it's, oh, it's just because of the empty calories. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I do believe that that could have a unique metabolic detriment. But I
Right.
would not generalize that to saying eating a raw walnut or, goodness forbid, a tin of sardines. Because I've literally had people say a Quest bar is healthier for you than a tin of sardines because the sardines have more polyunsaturated fat and those are going to get oxidized. Omega 3 is a polyunsaturated fat. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. I don't believe that for a second. I would say I'd have the sardines over the Quest bar every time for nutrition. Sorry, Quest. Um, so I think part of the problem is we're not clear about what we are talking about. Are we talking about oxidized processed industrial oils? Or are we talking about foods rich in omega 6 and linoleic acid intake, or just polyunsaturated fat intake in general? So I wish we could get rid of this term seed oils and say industrialized oils, omega 6, and polyunsaturated fats. I
Right.
think that would be a lot more clear for discussion purposes.
But I'm glad you touched on something that I feel very opinionated about, which is that I think a lot of the detriment probably can be that a lot of the detriment probably can be derived from the state of the oils at the point that you're ingesting them. Because do I think that consuming a lot of oxidized oils into your body is going to prove to be ultimately detrimental? I do. Yes. I mean, basically, I think that, yeah,
There's much clearer biological plausibility for
right,
that.
right. I mean, pretty much any way in which you're getting exogenous reactive oxygen species into your circulation, probably not a good thing.
Yeah. You shouldn't
Right.
also like do a, steak so well done that it's charred and you're having like carcinogens and AGEs exogenously.
Yeah, where it's
Like,
just like, shedding crisps of charred everything. Yeah. And so, yes, I'm interested in diving into that in the same way that you are, as far as where does the evidence show where it's not getting that degree of being cooked and potentially getting into that state of potential like exogenous toxicity before ingestion.
yeah.
That's very relevant.
Yeah. I guess it's my broader point. It's like we need to have a more particular conversation. But I do not think, and this is the reason I push back, that dietary linoleic acid is necessarily a direct problem depending on the form it's being consumed. I don't think people need to avoid, because this is the conversation you hear, like, oh, that's high in omega 6, including things like olive oil, which is like, what, 12% or so omega 6. Like, don't avoid olive oil because you're afraid of like the PUFA therein. It's a little bit absurd, but people get really hysteric to the point that they're like dissecting the omega 6 to 3 ratio of eggs. And I'm like, first of all, the denominator on this is ridiculously low. So the ratio is pretty much meaningless. People get obsessive about it. There was a reel on Instagram recently saying Vital Farm eggs have more omega 6 than canola oil. And I'm like, because they have less than on an omega 3 source. So, first of all, like basic math,
Right.
if you divide 1 by 0.000001 and you divide 10 by 1, you know, you get two different numbers. But does that mean 10 is less than 1? No. So I don't know. People don't think through this. And I think this fear mongering that discredits the low carb community. And that is my hang up, is that there are a lot of fronts to fight, and the seed oil thing gets wrapped in to the broader low carb community. And some people then make, I think, commentary that lacks a strong evidence base and discredits more evidence-based, rigorous, potentially higher impact arguments and focuses, like reducing the sugar load in the food supply, or reducing sugar intake for individuals. You know,
Well, that's where it helps to kind of come in and level set, as it were, right?
one tries.
Let's talk about the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity.
All right.
So you certainly have some authorship here. Can you give us kind of an overview of what it is and how it works?
Sure. At a high level, eating a diet that spikes your blood sugar, which then also spikes your blood insulin, sends a signal to fat cells to grow. The insulin sends a signal to fat cells to get bigger, and that creates a pulling force, let's say, from the fat cells to bring in energy, including blood sugar, ketones, free fatty acids. The result of that downstream is one, an acute available energy deficit in the blood, let's say, but more to the point, decreased energy expenditure and increased hunger. So that chronically, over the long course of time, what you end up with is being more hungry and eating more energy intake, um, and expending less energy expenditure. And we see this in randomized controlled trials, including metas of RCTs, including recent RCTs. One, for example, published by Martins et al. In Obesity 2025, they looked at 69 women, 69 Black women, some of whom had insulin resistance. And they looked at them on a low-fat versus low-carb diet. And what they found is women with insulin resistance on the low-carb diet, one lost.
Let me pause you for 1 second. Let me take you back to, you were talking about the women, the study. Yeah,
There's a new study in obesity in 2025. Was Martins et al., where they took women, some of whom had obesity. Sorry, all of them had obesity. Some of them had insulin resistance, and those with insulin resistance, and I'll wrap it back to the carbohydrate insulin model in a moment. On a low carb diet, they lost more weight, but not only did they lose more weight, despite losing more weight, and weight loss usually decreases metabolic rate, they had higher resting energy expenditure and higher total energy expenditure. So there's a metabolic advantage to low carb, which we actually see across the literature, including in, for example, Adrian did a reanalysis of the Diet Fits, our RCT, which showed that in both groups, the mediating variable for weight loss was reduction in glycemic load. The thing about the carbohydrate insulin model that most people don't understand or gets overlooked is people think it breaks thermodynamics, and it doesn't at all. It's completely consistent with energy in minus energy out equals weight change. It just puts that as the dependent variable, not the independent variable. It's downstream of hormonal drivers like, or specifically insulin. So eating more high glycemic load foods, more sugar, spiking your glucose and insulin more leads to a signal to fat cells to grow, leading to increased energy intake and decreased energy expenditure over the long course of time. And this is a key point relating back to insulin resistance. The model will have a larger or lesser impact, or let's say the amplitude of the glucose and insulin swings and the downstream consequences, increased hunger, decreased energy expenditure, are going to be affected by how much insulin you secrete when you're given a carbohydrate challenge. And if you're more insulin resistant, you're going to secrete more insulin, which is going to send a stronger signal to fat cells to grow. One of the crappy things about insulin resistance, you hear about it and you think, oh, your cells are resistant to insulin. It's not exactly like that. Different cells become resistant to insulin to different degrees. So you get a 1-2 punch where your body's trying to compensate by spitting out more insulin, so you're hyperinsulinemic, and then some tissues are insulin resistant. So some tissues are getting too much insulin signaling, and some tissues are getting too little. Or in some cases, the same organ is getting too much and too little at the same time. So the liver, I'm sure one of your favorite organs. For example, insulin should shut off gluconeogenesis, right? Because there's a signal there's glucose around, so you want to shut off producing more glucose. But that pathway becomes insulin resistant. So you end up with more gluconeogenesis for a given glucose level, and you're spitting out glucose on top of glucose, so your blood sugar goes up. However, the pathway for de novo lipogenesis doesn't become insulin resistant as well. This was based on a paper published in PNAS. And so the high insulin levels force more de novo lipogenesis. So that pushes more fat into your blood too, which is why people with insulin resistance have high glucose and high fat in their blood, triglycerides. So it becomes quite complex, but at a high level, that's the carbohydrate insulin model, and it bears out again and again in the literature, including human randomized controlled trials, to be a very compelling model, including, by the way, in Mendelian randomization, which I know are a hot topic. There was a bidirectional Mendelian randomization, I forget the year, but where they looked at genetic risk scores for insulin secretion and how it predicted BMI. And also the reverse, genetic risk scores for BMI and how it predicted carbohydrate-induced insulin secretion. And the genetic risk score, which they validated for predicting carbohydrate-induced insulin secretion, predicted BMI, not the other way around. So there are many levels to support the carbohydrate insulin model. It does not mean calories don't matter. It doesn't mean carbs are the be-all, end-all. It doesn't mean carbs are evil. It is a valid model of chronic development of obesity that I think is better than other models. Definitely better than the energy balance model, which I wouldn't even classify as a model. It's just a cop-out.
That's actually where I was going to go next. I was going to have you do your best to Steelman the energy balance model, which is often thought to be in competition with the carbohydrate insulin model of
Right.
obesity.
Well, I would say let's start with the straw man, which honestly I think better represents the reality of how it's implemented, which is at the end of the day, it's energy balance. So if you eat less calories than you burn, you'll lose weight. If you eat more calories than you burn, you're going to gain weight. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's pretty much how it's taken.
That's usually what's known as CECO, short for
Yeah.
calories in, calories out.
So the energy balance model, as it's been articulated in the literature, and the more the Steelman is like, look, there are a complex set of hormonal modulators, specifically with respect to let's say neural and hormonal, specifically with respect to like brain function that drive increased energy intake and decreased energy expenditure. But, and this is my issue, it's like such a broad tent to be practically useless. To just say broadly, like signals in the brain cause you to eat more isn't really helpful. And to be clear, like even people outside the low carb community who have written like, third perspective pieces on this, like Jeffrey Flyer wrote one article comparing the carbohydrate insulin model to the energy balance model. And he basically said, actually he did say, the energy balance model is not a model of obesity like the carbohydrate insulin model is. The carbohydrate insulin model is not trying to be complete, but the energy balance model isn't even a model. It's just a hand-wavy recapitulation of the laws of physics. So the issue with it from a scientific point of view is it always can be back rationalized. And you see this practically where it's like, if I eat 5,000 calories and don't gain weight, was I in a calorie surplus? Because all the math would predict a yes. And I'm pretty good at math. But they're like, oh, no, because actually your energy expenditure was higher than you thought it was. I'm like, okay, well, that's not very useful. Or somebody who's like, counting their calories and eating 1,200 calories and their calculator says they're burning 1,800. And then they don't lose weight and they're frustrated and their coach is like, well, you might have had some like calorie creep and, maybe you weren't moving as much as you thought. So post hoc, you can always try to rationalize the surplus or deficit. So it's accurate to say in order to gain weight, you must have been in a calorie surplus, but that is not the same as saying the calorie surplus caused weight gain. That's the distinction. If people understand this distinction, they understand what I'm talking about. If they don't, they need to rewind and re-listen.
So in short, would it be fair to say the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity is much more falsifiable, it's much more testable
Yeah, it's a scientific model.
than the energy balance model?
Right. And a lot of the support for the energy balance model, I think, is incredibly weak. I mentioned a trial earlier, Kevin Hall's 2021 Nature Medicine trial. Tremendously flawed. In fact, I think completely invalid. What they did in that trial, for example, which actually, let me first describe it as people probably think about it, which was a randomized crossover trial in which people were put in a metabolic ward. So things could be measured, finely. Published in a top journal, Nature Medicine, that then showed a low-fat diet led to less caloric intake and more weight loss relative to a low-carb diet, right? All the bells and whistles, you want to listen to it because it's at the top of the pyramid of hierarchy of evidence.
And I think it's worth kind of unpacking that a little bit more for people who are not familiar. what's kind of exciting about the concept of these is that you get a bunch of people in, you randomize them to two different groups. One group starts on diet A first, and then halfway through flips to diet B.
Mhm.
The other group starts on diet B first, halfway through flips to diet A.
Yep.
And therefore, technically, both groups have gone through both diets. And then if the diet order made any difference, then theoretically that would become obvious as well.
No. Not the not the diet order made any difference, and we'll get into that.
Right.
But actually, people should pause and just say what you said, and
But
because
that's why I
you said,
stated it
like,
that way, right?
were you convinced by what Dave just said, or did you, like, immediately come up with a problem?
Right, right,
Probably you were convinced, because it sounds convincing.
right.
So now let's unpack it. First, I wanna get through some of the superficial stuff
Okay.
that, we've done a reanalysis of this. We didn't even bring this up in the reanalysis. Nevertheless, I want to. The diets are described as low-fat, plant-based, and animal-based, low-carb. You, Dave, have looked at the methodology for what the animal-based low-carb diet was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Is it right out of your cookbook? You have a cookbook for low carb?
no, it is not. You look at it, it's like, all right, this is animal-based low-carb. It's like cheesy broccoli Alfredo, snacks of roasted salted nuts, including roasted salted peanuts. There's, like, pictures, like, fried chicken on salad, like, pretty nasty looking tuna salad with probably, quote, "seed oil mayo," if you wanna pull the seed oils back into that. But I just remember looking at, like, I would be disappointed if I went to McDonald's and asked for a fried chicken salad and they served me that. Like, that's how abysmally designed I think the low-carb diet was. And on the back end, I actually hear that the design was, before the study was pulled off, criticized, and no changes were made. But it definitely was not a Steelman. It definitely was not a low-carb animal-based diet as most people eat it. I mean, just locking people in a metabolic ward with roasted salted nuts for a couple weeks without time for adaptation. It just like it definitely was a straw man from the beginning. That's go ahead.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't it wasn't what I think of myself. Again, kinda getting back to community standards, it wasn't what I would consider staples of the community.
No, it was people can look at methodology. It was a poorly designed diet. That aside, again, we didn't even mention this in the reanalysis that we did of the study. The core issue in this study was that in the original publication, they said we looked for but did not find evidence of diet carryover effects. What is a diet carryover effect? That is when one diet intervention has a carryover, or let's say a bleed on or a knock on effect that would carry over into the next phase. So basically, metabolic adaptation is what we're talking about. So if there were metabolic adaptations on a low carb diet, bearing in mind that we should have said that each of the diets were 2 weeks, and there was no washout period. So those who did the low carb diet first went low carb 2 weeks, straight into low fat 2 weeks. Those who did low fat 2 weeks, straight into low carb 2 weeks. And then they averaged it all together. They lumped it all together, the low fat versus the low carb, to come to the conclusions. The problem is,
So let me pause you because it's so important for what you're about to say. If I just started the diet from scratch, diet A,
Mhm.
does what I ate just before I started diet A matter?
Yeah.
If I start diet B, does it matter what I ate before diet B started? Does
Yeah.
that matter?
Right.
Right. And what you're saying is what's being stated in the original paper is that no, they looked and it didn't.
Yes. But they didn't provide any tests to support the idea that they looked. None.
But it is stated. It is
It is
actually referenced in the paper.
It is stated in the paper. I'll explain what their post hoc rationale was. I think it is pseudoscience, and I will support that. But moving on to what we found in our reanalysis, which was led again by a character you're getting to know well, Dr. Professor Adrian Sotomota, MD, PhD. In the reanalysis, the diet order effect was 3 times the size of the diet effect. So that thing that said they looked for and didn't find was so big that it was 3 times the size of the main effect reported originally. And basically what it was is there was metabolic adaptations to the low carb diet that were leading to decreased energy intake. So you could see this. And so there's a huge benefit to going low carb first and a detriment to going low fat first. Because basically what was happening was adaptations to the low fat diet were getting blamed on the low carb diet because it was paying off in that phase when the low-carb diet followed the low-fat diet, and adaptations to the low-carb diet that were beneficial, let's say, leading to decreased energy intake, they didn't, energy expenditure wasn't as much a focus, um, were getting credited to the low-fat diet. And you could actually start to see this once you looked into the data with a little bit more resolution. So, because of this diet carryover effect, which now all groups agree was a massive effect. There's no debate about that. There was a diet carryover effect, and it was 3 times the size of the main effect. It was big. Um, so given that, I mean,
But it wasn't in the conclusions of the original
no,
paper.
it was not. The original team has acknowledged it now, and we'll get to why I think their acknowledgments are problematic. But that aside, um, the second dietary phases were confounded by the diets that came before, right? Because of these metabolic adaptations. So low carb was stealing credit from low fat. Sorry, low fat was stealing credit from low carb. And then low fat was passing blame onto low carb. So what if we just hypothetically took the second period diets, be it low fat or low carb, and just got rid of them and looked at the first 2 weeks, because the first 2 weeks, it was basically a parallel arm randomized controlled trial, right? Okay, we could do that. What do we see? Well, actually, with 1 week of adaptation, so if we look just at the second week, because the first week considered like an adaptation phase, you actually see the low carb has less energy intake and, presumably more weight loss according to their own calories in, calories out model than the low fat diet. So the really only most relevant period in the trial also has opposite results to the original study, because you're starting to just see a little bit of adaptation to the low carb diet. And again, this is despite just having 1 week of adaptation, which is not nearly enough. A lot of the trials suggest more like, at least a month, probably more, that you want for adaptation. So you're just getting a little bit of adaptation, and compounded on the fact that it's a pretty poorly designed animal-based ketogenic diet. Again, imagine being someone who is habituated to a mixed diet thing, getting locked in the metabolic ward with, free access to ad libitum roasted salted nuts. Like, this is a different situation than free living people. Nevertheless, still, the low carb diet was showing an advantage in really the most relevant portion of the trial. So, long story short, the initial trial results I think were invalid. I mentioned earlier that even Walter Willett said these results are worse than useless, they're misleading, because this was a staple paper that has been entrenched in the literature. I don't understand why Nature Medicine has not retracted it. To me, it makes no sense how one could seriously defend this paper. Now, I will tell you what the team is saying in defense of their own paper. One, they have said that, well, all people on the low-fat diet arm lost more weight and ate less than people on the low-carb diet arm, or when they were on the low-carb diet arm. To be clear, that is completely irrelevant to the point being made and tangential. In no way, shape, or form, because again, like the low-carb diet was paying off during the low-fat phase, and detriments from the low-fat diet were paying off during the low-carb phase because of the absence of a washout. So to say when you mush it all together, overall, during the low-fat phase, people ate less is irrelevant. It's just a distraction statement. The other thing that I have not gotten a good answer for is they said, oh, well, we did look for evidence of diet carryover effect, but we didn't look between group. We looked within individual. This has even been published on, and I think it's ridiculous. It has no basis in logic, because think about it. What they're saying is, if we looked within participant for the diet carryover effect, what you're saying is, for each individual, we looked about how diet A impacted diet B and how diet B impacted diet A, the order for each individual. But each individual only did one diet order. So it doesn't make any sense. It's like me telling you that, Dave, I feel more energized when I have coffee after a nap than when I have coffee before a nap. And then you're like, Nick, but have you ever once in your life had coffee before a nap? I'm like, no, I'm just presuming. So there's no basic in logic. Like, and I have not seen a defense of this. So I see a lot of hand waving and gesturing without any serious defense. And with respect to the diet, carryover effect and the fact that they are acknowledging it, like in their own reports, they'll write their own reanalysis, something to the effect of, yes, this is interesting, and it puts our data in a new light, like a hand wavy thing where they're not acknowledging the relevance of, look, I don't see how a serious scientist could look at this and say the original report's results are incorrect, they're misleading, they're invalid, and the paper needs to be corrected or retracted. And the reason this is such an interesting topic to discuss is because superficially it has all the bells and whistles that would compel you to a particular narrative. Metabolic ward randomized controlled trial in top journal with, so you read that and you're like, okay, this actually does refute the carbohydrate-insulin model. It doesn't. It's just a bad trial. So you can see why these discussions are so difficult to have. And we've tried to have a debate around this, particularly on Simon Hill's platform, including Adrian and members of that original team that did not come together for reasons that
Yeah, there was some planning around that, what I understand.
Simon chose not to move forward with it. I don't know what his correspondences were with that team. It was kind of planned. Adrian and I had planned to travel, and then it didn't go forward. So I'd still be interested in having that discussion. If the team wants to send a representative to have that discussion with us, I'm sure we're both very game to have a cordial dialogue. Some of the dialogue has not been very cordial. I'll leave it at that.
But again, gets back to come together, accept challenge.
Come together, but if you don't, I will hold your feet to the fire. I was gonna say we, but like honestly, to be very clear, I'm not gonna like put this on Adrian or on Dave or on other members of our team. Like I'm the one with, I don't want to say a short fuse.
I know you're ready to mix it up a bit more. You're ready to not. I'm trying to think of a good way of stating this. You don't like to leave things in an unresolved state with regard to certainly, and this is something that I can say that I appreciate, particularly if it comes at our work in particular. You feel a lot more buy-in to respond and to set it up effectively.
Yeah. I value intellectual integrity very highly. I don't like hand waving, platitudes, gesturing, hierarchy and credential flexing. And the fact of the matter is science and medicine is very hierarchical. So there are definitely times in my career, this being one of them, where given my position as a medical student, that was taken advantage of in order to, quote, put me in my place. And for those listening, just so you know, there are elements that make me, I guess you could say, vulnerable, but I will not back down from a challenge or be intimidated by threats. I'll be smart and choose my time to punch back, and you can read between the lines on that if you want, but I'm not easily bullied.
But your point's well taken in that this does get to where social media is kind of the great equalizer.
Yeah.
You, in fact, and to be fair to many critics, sometimes it's a little bit too, let's say, permissive to the voices that aren't always as evidence-based. But if you've got it both ways, you've got both a good sense of presence, composition, presentation, as you're definitely mastering, on top of being very evidence-based, putting together the reasoning, making the case strong. You got it all. And now you can actually punch back to everybody across the board.
Yeah. There was one really funny moment where it was actually around the dialogue around this paper, and we used some of their own charts, but they had been abstracted. So it's basically coding the diet order effect and the diet, low fat versus low carb, in colors and shapes. And a member very close to the original team ended up unintentionally siding with us because of this abstraction, because the effect is like, it was just so clear. Like scientifically, I don't think you can argue with it, but because of the abstraction, he said something, and I'm like, whoa, that's great. I'm glad we have a consensus. There was then silence for a little while. Next tweet began with, "Oh fuck, I screwed up."
Really?
Yep. I'm intentionally not naming names right now. I can show you the tweet. Do you remember this? I think I might have showed.
No. I remember. I don't. Let me put it this way. I don't remember the
After
I
since that
screwed
point in
up.
times
Yeah.
since that point in time, it's been, quiet from their team, and it's not something that I'm gonna go, like, attack further right now. I think at this point, there's some, diplomacy and things to be handled on the back end, but this is still an evolving story.
But, I'm gonna take a moment to flex our own epistemic humility, which I really think literally our very first paper. We put out our code, we put out our data, and some people online had noticed in reexamining the data that there were some duplicates.
Yeah.
And that was embarrassing, but you know what? It was our mistake.
Yeah.
And so you, me, Adrian, we all got in a meeting. We did reanalysis with this in mind. We caught any and all duplicates in our data, and our beautiful 3D graph did not look as awesome.
Oh, yeah, this is your bar. This is LMHR paper.
The LMHR paper, our very first paper.
Right, because it was like, we had hundreds of people, and it was just like the way we were doing the Excel sheet, ended up being some duplicate.
Yeah. And props to them. It was a mistake on our part that we didn't catch that. Because of the nature of those repeating data, they were reinforcing existing people's
Yeah.
their association. So our association wasn't as good. We still had it,
Yeah,
and it was still
changed the conclusions. It just
right.
graph didn't look as pretty.
Right. But this it's an important lesson to I think I've literally heard this before a couple times from some researchers where they've said, "Oh, I don't want to put out there that like this is me negotiating with them because our critics are just going to poke holes in it." I'm like,
That's the point.
yeah, that's literally the feature, not the bug, right?
If you're afraid of that, you shouldn't put it out there to begin with.
Yeah, we shouldn't even do the study. If your concern is that people are going to find mistakes, it is the most laudable, most scientific position to say, I'm going to keep my books open, and I'm not going to count on peer review from my best friends. I'm actually going to have public review. I'm going to have everybody be able to take a look at it.